The books that I want to talk to you about today are the Neapolitan novels, a series by Elena Ferrante, and a very, very much different tone than the Scandinavian noir books that we often read in translated forms. The four books, Book one, My Brilliant Friend, The Story of a New Name, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay Behind, and The Story of the Lost Child. They're translated from the Italian and are copyright 2012. However, I would recommend these as readily today as I did back then. They are brilliantly written. Elena Ferrante is a master storyteller and a master writer. The books talk about a lifelong friendship, and Elena traces that through all books. Elena and Lila grew up in a very tough, rough neighborhood in Naples in the 1950s. And what is so interesting about this series is not only does it trace the lifelong friendship of these two women, it also traces the evolution of a nation, the growth of a neighborhood, the change. The city and the country is undergoing tremendous changes. In My Brilliant Friend, the first book in the series, there's a lot of discussion about the intense emotional connection between the two friends as they're growing up, their loyalty, and the circumstances in which they find themselves. And moving on to the second book in the new series, Lila gets married, and Elena continues to pursue her education towards a career. What is most interesting in this is the very deep emotional and psychological portraits that Elena Ferrante paints of the two friends, as Lila seems to be stifled by marriage. And while Elena sees this, she's also at the same time finding herself very stressed and finding the stress of her education and her career choice at times very challenging. So the friends, there's an undertone of jealousy, an undertone of wish I were you, glad I'm not, and that sort of back and forth, but written in such a deep and convincing style that it puts a whole new dimension on friendship. The third book in the series, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, brings us to another exciting chapter in the lives of Elena and Lila, who's sometimes called Lena in the book, so as not to be confusing. Lena has left her husband, taken her young child, and she's now working in a factory. She's a very strong, feisty woman still. Elena has finished her education and has written a novel which gets her great acclaim in the world. And yet along the way, we see the struggle in the sexual politics of the country. We see the changes in the country. And in parallel, again, the friendship of the two women as it progresses along is a very good depiction of what happens to people's lives as the world around them changes. The final book in the series, The Story of the Lost Child, finds the women both drawn back to their neighborhood in Naples. Elena has become a very successful novelist, is very well-to-do, but she still feels that pull to go back to Naples and the neighborhood where she grew up. Lila, on the other hand, has actually never really left, but in her strength, she's become a very entrepreneurial person, has set up her own business. And so we find, again, the two women have become very strong. And again, it typifies the changes that happened in their neighborhood and in their country, again, as a parallel to their lives.
My translated titles today both would fall under the genre of Nordic noir, though coming from two different countries. So firstly, I have audiobook 6 in the Millennium Series by, the Millennium Series was started by Stieg Larsson, but after his passing, finished by David Lagerkrantz. In this series, we have two main characters, one Mikael Blomkvist and Lisbeth Salander. Mikhail is a renowned political journalist who seems to always get himself into these situations, partly because he's good friends with Lisbeth Salander, who is this kind of take-no-prisoners hacker. When they get together, there is a fast-paced political scandal and, not surprisingly, a lot of death. Lisbeth has her eye on a long-standing nemesis in this one, and she is not going to stop until she finds her. Secondly, again, still Nordic Noir and an audiobook, is Snowblind by Ragnar Jonasson. Now, this title was originally published in Icelandic, and sorry, I should have been clear, this was originally published in Swedish. So again, still that Nordic Noir, but different places. In this title, it's set in a remote village where basically no one locks their door, a very friendly town where everyone knows everybody. It opens with a woman found naked and outside and bleeding in her garden. Kind of simultaneous to this, a well-known and famous local man also seemingly has an accident at the theater. As our police inspector in this book continues his investigation, it would seem that maybe these things aren't as unrelated as we would think. One of my favorite parts about translated titles, which I think comes across particularly well in audiobooks, is how important language is. Now, often, if you have a book that's originally published in English and then it's read in English, it flows a certain way. When a book is originally published in a language, especially those that aren't necessarily romantic languages like English, French, Italian, that sort of thing, the flow is completely different. And I think that does have an impact to the story. And I think the narrator can do a make or break job with that, especially in an audiobook. Again, I would also make the argument that in translated books, setting becomes particularly important, which isn't surprising because the books are often set where the original language is spoken. Next week, if you're following along with Rose and I, we're going to dive into some memoirs and biographies. If you need some help finding one, just get in touch with your library by emailing frontdesk@shelburne.library.ca.
We want to thank everyone for participating in another one of our virtual programs. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.